So, yesterday I said I would talk about my personal experiences with the IWW. But today I did a little bit of digging into the IWW, and I wanted to further examine the idea of creating a global anarcho syndicalist union to, of course, abolish all forms of state power. Now, this is what the IWW says that it wants to do. It wants to actually create a global federation of unions which are going to replace state power. They're going to tell the state of each respective country what to do and dictate what that state actually does using their worker power. Now, this seems like an insane goal considering the main achievements of the IWW in the US, despite having around 100 branches, is the creation of donut shops and burger joints in Portland. I thought I wanted to assess how close is the IWW to this goal, and is this a realistic goal, as well as how does this manifest? How does the idea of building an anarcho-syndicalist set of unions across the earth actually manifest? Do they side with or against US imperialism? For example, what kind of struggles do they adopt? So the IWW, here they have a set of branches all across US-aligned countries. We've got USA, Canada, UK, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Iceland, Australia, and New Zealand. So you can see, here they are in Europe, right? Western countries of Europe, IWW is located. Only one branch in Italy, good handful in the UK. So mostly the IWW is concentrated in the US, where it has around 100 branches, and a few dozen in the UK. The rest are fairly sparse. Now, I don't know the process by which the IWW determines, okay, here is a branch, right? But you can see, you can contact the IWW's email to say, hey, I have a branch, and I'm sure they'll ask for data on what your branch is doing and possibly dues money and membership information and other things. But I mean, anybody can really make something and call it the IWW. It doesn't have this sort of strong centralized leadership. There are no membership duties, meaning being a member doesn't mean you actually have to do anything. You just have to pay your dues. And even then, if you don't pay your dues, the people in the branch can decide, well, you don't have to, right? You don't have to. They can waive your dues and cover them using the IWW's income. So this is very interesting because this is an organization claiming to be the industrial workers of the world, and yet it is only operating in the Western US-aligned countries. So maybe an optimist would say, well, maybe they just want to operate in these countries because these are the only imperialist countries, right? And so you might say, well, aren't they trying to struggle against imperialism? Because, they don't represent the desires of the states of their particular countries. So you might think that it is okay for them to operate only in Western countries, but it still conflicts with their stated goal, and it still doesn't totally add up. Now, here's another wrinkle. A lot of people are not aware that the IWW is a member of the ICL-CIT. This is a larger coalition, the International Confederation of Labor. This is a larger coalition of anarcho-syndicalist unions, which is based in Spain. And the IWW has no clear positions on foreign policy, at least not publicly. If you subscribe to their news publications, they will cover certain things in their news and start to sort of establish these political positions on foreign policy, but they will always claim that these positions are apolitical since they're always kind of based in the same thing. But that's, it's not really possible to say, I want to side with the workers of every country, and then to say that this is an apolitical thing to do, right? That's not really possible to say, but that is their claim. And so you can't help but wonder how it manifests. What countries' struggles do they support and why? What is the actual result? So the ICL-CIT ties the IWW together with a few other organizations. Actually, we have the CNT in Spain, the FAU in Germany, the ESE in Greece, OZZIP in Poland, the USICIT in Italy, and oddly enough, the FORA in Argentina. Now, Argentina, I'm not really sure what the FORA does there, but it's interesting that they're operating in a country that, while friendly to the US, isn't really as closely tied as, say, for example, the UK or Germany. And excuse me for that burp. So why is the ICL-CIT, why do they operate in this particular way as well? Well, it is all based on this same logic that they have. In fact, the ICL-CIT wants to expand its operations to a global scale as well, and model new sort of anarcho-syndicalist labor organizations after the ones that already exist, right? But still, what is the actual result of this? Well, the ICL-CIT, and by extension the IWW, they're almost totally silent about US imperialism. The only time that they talk about anti-imperialism is they do actually oppose all forms of intervention, and especially focus on interventions in their own countries. They want to organize strikes against interventions in their own countries, right? So yes, they are pretty silent about a broader analysis of US imperialism, but they, as individual unions, are not nationalistic unions. These are anti-war unions with whatever effect that they have, right? So they attempt to be aligned with the workers of every country, regardless of the country's geopolitical alignment. Meaning that they fail to really recognize the existence of the unipolar system and the emergence of multipolarity, or to really talk about that. The only contradiction that the ICL and the IWW recognize is that of the people, the people like workers pretty much, versus governments and corporations, which, they don't want to have. They want a society that doesn't have a state, that doesn't have prisons, that doesn't have police, that doesn't have corporations, etc., etc. So they are anarchists after all, right? But what is the effect of what they do? And, they actually support workers striking in Myanmar, and they support the dragon workers strikes in Bangladesh. Now, I haven't personally investigated to determine, which side of that I would personally praise or support. But every single time there's a strike, there's a good bet that the ICL is going to publish an article praising and supporting the strikes. I mean, they praised strikes in Belarus, they praised strikes in Poland and in Germany and in Italy, right? So there's no clear alignment with or against US imperialism, only with those that strike against those that they strike against, and trying to organize more and more strikes. It's a very simple perspective, which results in this kind of odd, non-aligned perspective. And in addition to strikes, they also support uprisings. So they praised the Black Lives Matter movement in the USA. They say that riots work. I think that, there's situations where, riots can have a positive effect politically in terms of achieving concrete aims, right? But I disagree with the thesis that the Black Lives Matter riots actually achieve very much in America, right? But that's neither here nor there. And they also are trying to operate in Syria to align with Kurdish fighters against Turkey in particular. They really condemn Turkey. And they also have a sort of feminist angle. So they support any feminist movements around the world, and especially, strikes of women like textile workers and this kind of thing, right? Now, notably, they actually took a measured approach to the Hong Kong protests, debunking the notion that they are pro-democracy and actually slamming them as out-of-control riots. Now, of course, they support labor strikes in Hong Kong, but they didn't actually support those Hong Kong protests. So the ICL isn't totally blanket anarchist. They actually do have some sense of sanity to see that astroturfed protests like Hong Kong that don't represent the will of the people in that country, or not country, but in Hong Kong in general, they can understand what that actually is, right? And also, they take a position on the Ukraine war. They condemn the Ukraine war as an inter-imperialist conflict and demand that NATO should be abolished. Now, they do implicitly condemn Russia, and I don't really agree with this condemnation and this sort of detached, we shouldn't be involved perspective. Though, coming from Europe, this perspective is still one which I agree with in terms of their opposition to NATO. And, they demand that NATO be abolished and actually want to organize strikes against involvement in NATO and strikes against involvement in this war, which I agree on, right? But the problem, again, is that instead of being part of a broader political movement, with a broader meaning to it, instead they find these issues to say we should have a general strike around this issue, but it's very hard to actually organize a strike around this issue, especially not if people's conditions haven't deteriorated to that point. Now, maybe when Europe descends into darkness and when it doesn't have access to natural gas and this kind of thing, then they will have some sort of ability to organize people. But, it is strange to me that they don't condemn the Nord Stream bombing, for example. They don't advocate for buying natural gas from Russia. It's entirely this sort of people-centric, labor-centric movement that doesn't place itself in the broader picture. It just is people need to strike, people need to rise up, just in general. And this very sort of oversimplified political line that I think a lot of people see as nonsense, right? And this line that they claim is apolitical because it splits apart, it can support both sides of US imperialism, both for and against it. Well, because it can support both, sides of this, they'll say it's apolitical because it's not aligning with these sort of existing things. But really, it's a new type of politics. It's a new type of political alignment. And they need to recognize that they are, in fact, political as much as they claim to be apolitical, and that they do, in fact, need to have a broader analysis of the situation. So back to the IWW, right? So the IWW's general theory is that people will fight for what they want, and workers will fight for what they want, whatever that sort of happens to be. And that by fighting more and more and amplifying these struggles, workers will begin to identify as a class, and then they will be able to gain decisive control over the state. And then by being able to strong arm the state into doing what they want, they will make the state useless and powerless and sort of replace it. Daniel De Leon was one of the founding members of the IWW, and he actually advocated for replacing the US government, the House and Senate and, all of these branches with a simple, body that contains unions, right? A meeting of unions and workers, and creating a sort of anarcho-syndicalist state, as you might call it, right? But the IWW doesn't advocate for anything like that in particular. Instead, they advocate that the state will become useless and meaningless in the face of these people's organizations, which can dictate its policy, right? And this is not just on a national level, but it's supposed to occur on a global level, meaning that every single state in every single country will be offset by the existence of these organizations. And that this, central body, the ICLCIT, is going to just disseminate information between different people and try to coordinate them in some sense, but without having a sort of binding leadership. This is a very strange contradiction to me, because how can you have a decentralized leadership of different national struggles while also saying that these national struggles should seek to abolish their national character? What happens when multiple labor struggles in the self-interest of multiple peoples, which are not actually coordinated top-down on an international basis, have some sort of conflict with each other? What are they supposed to do? And which I think would inevitably happen, except for in the name of practicality, the IWW and related institutions avoid engaging in politics, as they say, meaning that they avoid any kind of conflict that they would have from trying to involve their union in the bigger picture. So they use this sort of oversimplified politics, which they say is not politics, to create this alignment where there is no ability for disagreement, and there is also no ability to situate them in the bigger picture. Now, they believe that, for example, if your country wants to go to war, that people should just do a general strike and cripple the state's capacity to wage war until the state says, okay, we will no longer wage war, right? So they basically want to replace electoral democracy with this sort of direct democracy of anarchist unions. And this sort of anarchist democracy is organized in a way without centralism. So anyone who disagrees with the decision, for example, may simply ignore it or go against it, meaning, decisions are not binding on the whole organization. So, I remember being in my branch of the IWW, there were basically leaders who were not particularly useful, but, they did their thing. So these leaders sort of try to coordinate the branch. And then there's a large part of the branch that just kind of does its own thing, ignores the leaders for the most part, doesn't really participate in meetings or democratic processes, and trying to get them to do anything was like herding cats. They just wouldn't do it. And this is why I think the IWW doesn't actually grow and succeed, because it lacks this sort of central leadership. It lacks the ability to tell its members what to do. And sure, this freedom from decentralism can be very attractive and it can be very good, but also an organization that intends on achieving such concrete aims should have the ability to organize itself in a more authoritarian way, right? Now, this concept of the one big union, as they call it, they want to create one big global union to do all of this. This is at least 100 years old, and it's had its own history. It's all played out. It's not going to succeed. It never did succeed. And think about, even in the past, there were much stronger unions, and it actually seemed possible that unions could be a threat to the state, or that they could replace state power, like in the Soviet Union. But now, how is this even remotely possible? It actually astounds me that there's people that think that the IWW strategy of the one big union has any viability. Now, maybe in the far future, it will have some sort of viability if things continue to grow. And we can see that in America, there has been some level of resurgence of the labor struggle, but this is not at the hands of the IWW. This is actually at the hands, largely, of corporate unions, which are much more reactionary and oftentimes pro-war. Unions like the IBEW, which directly fund major parties and which actually are against any sort of populist movement whose purpose is to pacify and dampen workers, right? So the idea of the one big union just seems very unrealistic now, even more than ever. And it amazes me that so many people are in the IWW, and, so many people just probably, my guess is they don't even read this one big union document. My guess is that they don't even understand the IWW's broader strategy. My guess is that they just want to create a militant union in their workplace, and the IWW is the one group that claims that they can do it. But I think that it is a dead end. I really don't think that it's going to go very far. So, in this video, I have talked about the sort of global nature of the anarcho-syndicalist struggle in general and how the IWW plays into it, and offered a critique of that. And in the next video, I will cover a different aspect of the IWW. I still plan on talking about my personal experiences in the organization, but today I just wanted to convey some of this research that I have done and some of this feedback that I have on this form of organization and why I think that it is going to fail. This has been Hertz from Bismuth. Remember to like the video if you like it, dislike if you don't like it, comment if you have something to add, maybe I missed something, subscribe for more, and share this video around so that other people can get the message. See you next time.